In our last video, we discussed macro definition variables and why they should be used in our pervasive processes. In this video, we will continue that conversation and discuss how macro def variables are used and accessed through Pervasive Data Integrator. The Macro Manager window is used for maintaining macro def variables within a data integrator process. Developers have the ability to create, edit, and delete macro def variables using the Macro Manager window. This window can be accessed both from Process Designer and Map Designer from the Tools menu. To access macro def values when setting up source and target connector information, the following syntax is used: $, parenthesis, the name of the macro def, parenthesis. Developers can manually type this into the connector information fields or can use the paste macro string functionality found in the Tools menu of Map Designer. To access macro def variables within RifleScript, the following functions can be utilized. First is macro defined. This is used to determine whether or not a macro def has been defined. This function returns a value of true or false. The second function used is define macro. This is used to create or set the value of existing macro def values. This function takes two arguments, the macro def name and its corresponding value. If the macro with the provided name already exists, the value of that macro will be updated. On the other hand, if it does not exist, a new macro will be created, thus creating a macro def dynamically through RifleScript. Third, the macro value function is used to retrieve the value stored within a macro def variable. Similarly, the macro expand function can be used to replace the $ notation of a macro def within text or other macro def variable definitions with the value of that macro def. You can see here in this example that we have the string, the input directory is, and then we see the $ notation of the macro def. This call will return the input directory is C users Chris desktop. More times than not, macro expand will be used as opposed to macro value. The last function is clear macro, and this clears the value of a macro def that was previously defined. Both developers and end users also have the ability to modify the macrodef.xml file that contains the macrodef variables defined and used by the process. Updating this XML file can be accomplished by using any text editor because all the data in this file is clear text. A custom user interface could also be developed for editing the macrodef XML file if required. A few tips and tricks from the Enterprise team are: 1. Standardize your macrodef names. For example, you could use all uppercase letters. You could also prepend or append different tags to identify different types of macros, as seen here with input, output, and directory. Secondly, create a standard macrodef file. Use a standard macrodef file for all processes. This will ensure that 90% of the macrodefs used in each process are the same. Here's an example of what a standard macrodef file may look like. Third, define macrodefs using other macrodefs. In the macrodef.xml file, the $ syntax can be used to define macrodef variables. For example, if root directory was set to C users Chris desktop, an input directory needed to be defined. It could be defined as $ parenthesis root dir parenthesis /test. This would set the input value to C users Chris desktop test. Fourth, use macrodefs to store global values. Macrodef variables can be used to pass values throughout the data integrator process. For example, you could define and calculate a macrodef at runtime that can be accessed later on in the process. And lastly, make your SQL dynamic. Macrodef variables can be used within SQL steps to make the SQL dynamic. You can use a macrodef to specify the name of a staging table used for processing. It is important to note that all macrodef logic is executed prior to the execution of any SQL command. This means that values returned from the execution of a SQL statement cannot be stored in a macrodef variable. If you have any questions regarding macro definition variables or any other topics in Pervasive Data Integrator, please feel free to contact Enterprise Technologies. We're here to help.